computer, I think.
Boom,
So
recording.
we are
Hey, people,
back.
remember, like and subscribe. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank heavens Corvin remembers to say that. I think it's beneath me. What about our dignity, Corvin? What about our dignity?
Zero
So,
dignity.
well, exactly. So first of all, I was telling Corvin, and I'll see if I could find it, about maybe I can share my screen. Don't know, old people are fucking useless, aren't they? Share. And there we go, that one there. Share that very briefly. I wanted to share that part of my screen. Wait till it pops up on the screen. I I was telling Corvin there is currently a cruise ship zooming through the Straits of Hormuz. And I think he didn't believe me. It turns out there's only so much Dubai sightseeing you can do before
How
you've
long have they been stuck there, the poor
You
bastards?
know, I imagine since this war kicked off, they've been had
6 weeks.
the best view of some of the fireworks you could possibly want. But I will bet some of those latrines are backing up. It seems to be a general problem with navies and ships.
Don't
So
they just flush it all into the ocean,
yeah, into the Gulf, I think
into
in
the
this case.
Gulf?
And you've
Which
got
is
the
the one thing when you go
Atlantic.
swimming into the ocean. People complain about don't piss in the sea. Where do
Yeah.
you think the fish go to the bathroom?
A lot of middle schoolers ask that question and they all giggle with the answer. And we all have to get over it. Life goes on. I've got bird shit on my car. In fact, one of the things I notice is that the the roadkill you used to get on windscreens driving through places like West Texas. Actually, East Texas was just as bad.
You mean bugs or roadkill?
Bugs. And these days you don't see as many. And I think that's got to be quite a fearsome and rather gnarly personal observation.
I
That
think
it's,
that's it. That's like part of the DDT, right? And the
I
pesticides and
imagine
the
it's a
death
pest.
of bees and the end of the world.
Right. So what are we going to do without the pollinators? I mean, I can do without the mosquitoes,
We're
but
gonna invade Texas.
right. Uh, it's all going to get quite nasty. But anyway, so this is interesting. So we're back. I'm busy writing something, Corvin. I'm writing something I've written. A standing title at the moment is On Being Wrong.
Yes.
And I'm writing about the deal that seems to be forming between the United States and Iran and how that meshes with new all-time highs in equities. And as I wrote it, my first draft here, as I, banging it out, right?
Uh-huh.
I noted here that some part of it, one of the questions here, is why are stocks trading new all-time highs when we've actually seen a significant destruction of global infrastructure, significant hiatus to output in the
And in the
Gulf.
last video, you said they'd have to liquidate rather, right, to rebuild. I kind of made the
Right.
point always be long the equity risk premium.
You did, and that's the
So
thing.
hey, I'm gonna hack in true
Yeah,
strategist manner.
that's
I was
right.
right, people. So do subscribe and like here.
That's right. And my like typing out, I said, other than because as Corvin reminds me, always reminds me, I should have written, stocks generally go up. So yeah, what could that be about? And I don't know. We were going to do two videos today. One was going to be on stuff you've been up to, which is fascinating. Um, Although I wish I'd recorded the bit where you said, "Where does the time go?"
No,
And
it does. Like, because we were talking about Dubai and then we were talking about camel sausages. Then I remembered that 30 years ago, that's exactly what I did in Egypt. And I realized the passage of time is just deteriorating all of us, which leads me to the discussion I had earlier with my wife today in terms of how I'm cutting years out of my existence by following my vices on YouTube, right? Like, I'm gonna choose.
yeah, you got to drop this whole YouTube thing. It can't be good for you. Um, so let me ask you, because you are effectively German, and kind of topologically identical to a German,
Thank you.
and but you've also lived in the UK and you've had camel sausages. So talk to me, which was your favorite sausage?
That's such an interesting question, especially because I'm now also in Central America, that obviously for the last 600 years has enjoyed a very strong Spanish influence.
Hmm.
And apparently, I found out years ago from my wife that the Spaniards are very much into sausages. And I had to respond, no, they think they
They
are.
think they're into sausage.
They
What do they
think they
know about
are.
sausage? These people
Absolutely
think.
nothing. Like if you have not eaten German sausage, you just don't know where you are, right? This is becoming very phallic, by the way.
That's the problem with theoretical physics. Physicists, everything becomes phallic so quickly.
That's
So,
because they never get laid, right? Like, I mean, you ever go to the computer science department, physics department, it just doesn't happen, right?
I just assumed it happened when I wasn't visiting. Because every time I visited, looked around and said, "It's a sausage party."
Well, Elon Musk is making up for it. I mean, the crazy thing is making up for it without having sex and still having children, which blows your mind.
Talk about telling you that you never got much at college. Like, how could you say it more clearly? Uh, anywho.
Anyhow,
So
so
should
now
we
going
start?
back at, go ahead.
Should we start with the Iran story? Should we start with what you've been up to? What do you want to discuss?
I think one will mesh very nicely into the other because ultimately it is about fair value, right? And where we believe fair value to be. And it sounds like what's happening in the equity markets. I mean, the last 3 days have been just absolutely bombastic, right? The S&P went up from 6,400 to now flirting with 7,100, right? And that 7,000 barrier has just been like a complete deadbeat. And so the question is, somewhere somebody is perceiving value to be much higher than it is. And
You know,
ultimately
I got,
that's what trading is about, right? Like we are away from fair value. It's a competitive landscape, so we all kind of try to pile in, and somebody feels like they're missing out on somebody. So I'd like to hear from you, where is fair value? Especially we've talked about the credit bubble and the private
yeah,
credit kind
yeah.
of thing that's infiltrating stuff. We've talked about the fact that we're expecting liquidations out of the Middle East, and so this downward pressure. So where's the solution coming from? I'd love to hear your
All
opinion on that.
right, so I'm gonna taxonomically treat this as on the, hashtag Iran.
Hmm.
And I'm going to stop the video at like the 50-minute mark because no one's got that attention span.
Oh,
And
you'd be
we're going to
surprised.
restart the video and to discuss Corvin things and do a second video on what you've been working on recently. And so yeah, this question. So first of all, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, right? And then how did I get something so wrong? So number one, I'm not sure I got everything wrong, but I definitely got equities completely damn wrong. And when I think about this, I don't have many frames to explain it. One of the frames, and I was bullish before the Iran war, and the reason I was bullish before the Iran war was that fiscal policy peaks in 2026 as a stimulus factor in Q1. And it's about 3% annualized Q1 stimulus. Um, and for me, one of the key learnings of COVID was fiscal policy really works. That stuff is turbocharged asset catnip. You shove a little bit of, you add 8% of GDP in fiscal policy, and you will see your equity markets rally like crazy. Um, so that was one hypothesis. And then there's an involuntary fiscal factor as well. I saw a tweet pointing out that the US debt service interest payments reached a new all-time high in Q1. And these things are like tankers, they turn around very slowly. So debt service payments from the US Treasury are high because deficits are high. Deficits are high because bombing Iran isn't cheap and because we always planned in the big beautiful bill to have quite a lot of stimulus in Q1, and because we built up a lot of debt in the previous year, so there's you know, I think the technical term is crap ton, but you're a physicist, you know better than me about quantities, googolplexes, crap tons, all of these things. And so, these things are turbo. And if you also check, you'll notice that equities are new all-time highs, but bonds are not. Bonds have been a little crappy. And
Which is
some,
always interesting, right? Because the equity crowd and the bond crowd don't necessarily love each other, right? And the bond people tend to claim to be slightly more intelligent than the equity crowd. So the
this is
bond,
this is a very 1980s, 1990s view to take.
oh God,
Um,
time again, right?
yeah, and actually, we all know that more money has been made in equities for the previous 30 years. So actually, that it's the money that attracts the minds. So I would guess that the equity crowd are a bit sharper these days. The bond crowd can necessarily do arithmetic. They can even do calculus 101. right? Especially us derivative guys. So I don't know. I don't know who's smartest. I think that the smart guys are the ones getting paid the most. That puts us in the dumb end of the spectrum, I think.
And so
But
where would the FX guys come in? Because they tend to be compared to
you
Neanderthals
know,
dogging their
yeah,
knuckles.
you know the phrase animal, mineral, vegetable, right? The FX guys are the animals. It's a very old markets, taxonomy. So anyway, that's my first guess as to why, and because it can't be the case. Logically, you can't say before the war, equities were good, but now they're even better because we had the war. I guess somebody could say something like we have gotten rid of the threat, the menace that was Iranian terrorism, but it's not clear that we have. So my guess is that overall you have to have another factor which is responsible for pushing markets to new highs. And if I were out looking for them, my number one choice is fiscal policy. And that will reverse.
We could even cook up a conspiracy theory. It's kind of coincidental that the entire February to April debacle actually mirrors the February to April debacle around tariffs from last year, isn't it? It's like, was this entire thing cooked up so that we're going to rally into the midterms
Uh,
and
I,
then have a
I,
massive vote in favor of whoever manages to push equity markets up, who of course must be the Republicans, right?
this hasn't been popular up till now, but a lot of that's about presentation. Maybe you can adjust the presentation to make if you wrap a defeat up in victory wrapping paper, does it become a victory? I'm not saying that there was a defeat or there was a victory, but I do think we underestimate how wrapping can change, the packaging, the propaganda can change the perception. So,
Completely.
so that's one thing. And then I'd reverse your logic, saying nobody would choose to start a war just ahead of midterms. So this was the only window of opportunity. If you had to do, if you felt like you had to do something, you were going to time it for now. And you're right, people have to plan these things in advance, like parents at Christmas. If you fail to do, if you fail to do the planning, bad things happen. People can get very upset. The guy who didn't get the batteries in, oh my God, for that train set. They
But
need
I
these.
think what's really interesting, right? It reflects how difficult it is to forecast the short term. So one thing that would be interesting to ask, especially in terms of fiscal stimulus, it's interesting that yes, gold had this big unwind, right? But now it's massively catching up and rallying back up. It's as if what was interesting, you would have expected gold to be a safe haven during this war, kind of didn't rally as it should be. And interestingly enough, now with with the war kind of seeming, or at least everybody seemed to be civilized about it, gold is rallying back up, and that's actually interesting as well, right?
It is interesting. I mean, I would rationalize a sell-off in gold. Like there was, these Gulf states had currency pegs, and the currency pegs are to dollars, and they've been unable to, to raise the customary revenue through the period, because of straits have been blocked. So they would have liquidated something, and gold is the obvious thing to liquidate. If anywhere had been buying gold in the run up to this, it would be the Gulf states. I noticed that I saw a tweet with a particular a printed currency. Dubai has just printed some gold notes. Um, and I know the guys who are involved in manufacturing those gold notes, and it's like a fascinating
That's
thing to say.
Valorum, right?
Yeah, it is. And let's
Shall we do
avoid.
product placement?
I
Very
was
happy to
going to
do
say,
that.
let's avoid the product placement for that. I haven't got a deal in with Valorum at this point in time,
Okay,
so
okay, let's scrap the
we're
product
going to
placement
have that's right. No, 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 naughty Valorum. So, but I did notice that, so it was happening. Um, you know, on the geopolitics of it, I saw a tweet from Marco Papic, smart guy, likable guy, actually, nice guy. And he pointed out that Iran had done surprisingly well, but at some point you have to cash in your chips. You have to
Yes.
convert your advantage into, and if you overplay your hand, what do you do? What would Iran have managed to achieve? They'd have persuaded people we needed to um, put pipelines away from the Gulf through to whichever direction we can, maybe through to the Mediterranean coastline. I noticed that maybe Netanyahu was suggesting such a thing would be a great idea. I don't know if everyone else agrees with him. I can see why he'd think it. Um, instead of having Iran controlling energy output, you prefer Israel, of course, not necessarily if you're Saudi. So I could see how this could work in different ways. Um, I think the key, we don't know whether the two sides are aligned in their understanding of the other side's weakness. So um, I think the Iranians believe that they just managed to persuade the Americans to force the Israelis to quit in Lebanon, that they've got a ceasefire announcement in Lebanon. How it's sold is one thing. That's quite interesting degrees of leverage. They'll paint it that way internally for sure. Is it true? How much leverage do they have? Donald Trump did True Social posts where he said that the blockade will remain intact for the time being, which limits imports into Iran. Iran needs to import food and it would like to export its own oil. It's not clear that's even true. That might be stuff he's telling to us kids back home. But we don't know whether the US Navy is interdicting all ships. We can't see it, and there's some evidence it isn't. Um, so we don't know exactly what's happening there, but the the blockade on Iran, it won't bite for maybe another 10 days. So the Iranians have time to negotiate a bit and we get to try it out. The
Right, because this entire Strait of Hormuz story, at least what I heard from what the foreign minister of Iran said, it's really only open for the duration of the ceasefire, right? So it sounds interesting. On the back of that news, you wouldn't expect that kind of rally. I guess people are kind of saying that, okay, so it's a done and dusted deal, assuming that during this duration of the next 2 weeks, we can find some happy medium. And that's a big assumption, I guess, right?
well, you know, my I'm viewing it as a victory for Iran. And other people would say, "Don't be absurd. It's not. Of course, it's not a victory for Iran." I say, that's great. I don't really. It doesn't matter. What matters is whether stocks go up and whether oil is flowing. And I do think there's a risk that oil won't flow. As it is, we've already built disruption into the global economy. There will be some disruption.
Right, and that's such an interesting point. I'd like to ask you about that, right? Because there's a lot of different people saying that the disruption could teeter us on the edge of a potential recession throughout this year. If the strait had been closed for longer, then that recession could even turn out to be worse than the Great Recession. And I wonder, is that more kind of eschatological talk?
There's a lot of eschatological talk out there, as long as it means what I think it means. Um, if this is revelationary, as in the end of times type
Yes.
nonsense, I think it's a region, right? It's endemic to the region. Megiddo, the town that Armageddon is named after, is I think in Syria, northern Syria. The whole thing has been a war zone for God knows how long. So that's going on. But I think to myself, the Iranians managed to get the US to respect the original ceasefire deal. There seemed to be a misunderstanding about Lebanon. That misunderstanding involved the third party to this war. They have their own interests, and their interests are not perfectly aligned with the United States. Um, so it's interesting. And I would say there's a chance the whole thing breaks down if they're too far apart. I would also note that final delivery, like you have to make election to deliver physical in the US on the 25th of the month. We're on the 17th. So there's a lot of talk about physical versus paper in commodity markets, and you can manipulate the settlement price. You can't really manipulate physical. If the price had stayed high for a few more days, one more week, people would have had to think about whether they wanted to elect for physical. If they elected for physical, we'd find out whether or not oil markets are tight in the United States as well, and whether or not we can find the ships to move the oil and oil product to Asia. As it is, oil product is going to be tight. The inventory of crude that had sailed out of the Gulf, the last ships that went out before the Iranians blocked the straits, are just arriving in their respective destination ports. So you won't have seen the real full effects of what has already happened for another week or so. Um, and that it's a flow, not a stock. This is crucial for understanding leverage. I think we're already seeing, and I'm seeing stories of this, of supply problems in fertilizers, of supply problems in helium, which is necessary for semiconductor manufacturing, among other things, medical imaging devices. So there are supply problems within the United States in obtaining helium. Um, and supply problems for sulfuric acid in places like the Congo, which is used in metal refining processes and in fertilizers. So these issues were starting to emerge as futures delivery approached. This is a good time for something to come up to alleviate the pressure. So, and at the same time, talk softly but carry a big stick. The US is sending additional military resources to the region. There will be free carrier battle groups in the region. There will be 50,000 soldiers.
So right, so then you could
Test it
potentially
out.
argue that the ceasefire was kind of a ruse to buy more time, right?
On both sides, I think the Iranians perceive that every day that the straits are blocked increases the pressure on the global economy. And the US perceives every day they wait, first of all, relieves the pressure on their local allies because they were getting hit. But also, it allows them to build up additional forces so that while they're negotiating, the stick gets bigger and bigger over time. Now, in practice, I think the turning point, the blink, came when the Iranians hit a particular industrial park in Saudi Arabia. They hit it with one missile. The thing produces 7% of Saudi GDP. So they only hit one part of that plant. But 7% of Saudi GDP was immediately threatened. This was in retaliation for some damage to their infrastructure. And the Iranian point, the message was this is tit for tat. If you hit our infrastructure anymore, we will hit essential infrastructure in the oil producing regions, which will do immeasurable damage to the global economy. You won't be able to get hold of your sulfuric acid, your helium, your whatever. It'll be gone, and then we're all in trouble. Don't do it. And I think that worked. Now, does that work for
So what you just said actually hits an interesting point in my head, right? Because one of the big stories, the underlying themes of popular politics over the last decade has been let's move away from globalization, right? Let's build our walls, let's separate, segregate. And it sounds like it's actually impossible to do that.
No, it's
We are,
perfectly possible, but you can't do it. You can't reverse 30 years of globalization in
but even so,
5
right? Like
years.
your resources are stacked in different countries, right? If there's no cooperation, then, well, okay, you can continue existing, but the question is how.
I wrote a paper on this in 2018. I am that boring, I know. And one of the points I made was we've always had a tension between resiliency and efficiency. There's always a trade-off there. Um, by globalizing, we have massive gains to efficiency. You want to produce your petrochemicals near where you have really cheap hydrocarbons and where you have really cheap energy. That's where they should be produced. But if you do that, you become dependent on those places. So it only works if the world is perfectly safe. Well, if the world wasn't perfectly safe, you might want all of your essential industry back home where you're not vulnerable if it gets cut off. So we're in the process of moving to this less globalized world, but it's a process and it would probably take, roughly speaking, 30 years to reverse it. You might be able to partially reverse it in 10, but no, there's a whole bunch of liquefied natural gas facilities in Qatar, and there ain't no better place to put it because that's where the gas is, right? So,
So that
um,
makes an interesting forecast in terms of our I guess a lot of this argument is also based that the status quo of technology and energy production stays where it's at, right? And I guess ultimately we have to fix some variables, right? Because then you would have the kind of the Bay Area people telling you that okay, cold fusion is around the corner. We're all going to have reactors in the garden. We're going to have robots alleviating all pain points of our lives, and we're going to live utopia, right?
Well, maybe not. You might, but I obviously wouldn't. I'm far too negative for that kind of outcome. Come on. But yeah, everybody is that what I love about communism and the Chinese is that they publish their 5 year plans. So you know exactly what they consider the priorities of the next 5 years to be. And that's quantum computing, clean green energy, robotics, AI, nuclear power. Well,
Well, exactly what I mentioned. Talking of which, can we just hit the pause button for 5 seconds? I'm going to top up and be right back.
yeah, absolutely. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Zero record. So let me just play some theme music. Do you remember this tune by any chance? You're a child of the or a teenager of the 80s.
Interestingly, I can't hear it. I'm not sure if the sound
I'm sorry,
system.
no, it's because it's not coming off my headphones, but it's Voyage
Oh,
Voyage.
yeah, of course,
You remember
absolutely, right?
Voyage Voyage? You know why I mention it, don't you?
Well, there was an interesting AI thing with Trump singing blockade, blockade.
That's right. And I mentioned that because honestly, I'm a big war fan and I love following these things. But I'm a huge troll fan as well. And the trolling standard in this war has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, the Iranians, you could question whether or not they've held their own, or is it a moral victory or not a moral victory for them, or what? I think a lot of people would say that they've enhanced their prestige, while at the same time their infrastructure has been severely degraded. But on the trolling front, they have definitely won the troll war hands down. That blockade was
Was that
hilarious.
from them? I didn't
Oh,
realize.
oh yeah, Iranian trollery at its highest. What do you mean? They got the president of the US doing synth, 80 synth. Yeah. And then they've got those Lego. Did you see the Lego
Yes, the Lego
movies?
movies were
Oh my
phenomenal as
God.
well. The one thing, there was a bit of a tease, right? Because they kept on teasing that they would drop the big one, send the big one, or do something with a big rocket, which hasn't happened to date, right? I'm still kind of waiting what that big rocket is all about.
Well, maybe it has happened and it just wasn't reported. There's a big bang somewhere in the Middle East. Who's to say? But yeah, I don't know. Great question. So, I think like if it was fiscal, for example, it's not just fiscal. There are other possibilities to drive us to new all-time highs. And as I said, I got this one
Well, I'd
complete.
have a question since we're talking about equities, right? And I guess
Mhm,
one of the
mhm.
stories was that Europe is going to be completely fucked in this entire story, right? It's going to be the
Uh,
one region. So you kind
Fucked.
of
Yeah.
expect it to be reflected in the equity markets. But the one thing that you see is, okay, yes, US is rallying and it's above all-time highs. But like if I look at the DAX today, well, it's doing pretty well as well.
Hmm.
So it's the FTSE.
I
And
think this is a
with
great
that, how
point.
does that story kind of correspond to Europe being the laggard, the one who's getting beaten? Because it doesn't get reflected in the markets, right?
So I don't know how good you are with trading view, Corvin, but I would pull up
Go ahead.
the dollar effective. If you good with pulling that up, because I'm useless with trading view.
Dollar effective of what?
The effective dollar exchange rate, the Dixie.
Oh, you mean okay, okay, yeah. Got it. Yes.
It might be worthwhile pulling that up if you could share that screen. I'm not sure it'll work on the way we've done the video. I think there's a special
Okay.
setup I have to do.
No, I do have share and I can share screen
So we'll
3.
try it. So, and tell me what you think about dollar effective over the last few weeks.
Okay, well, it's kind of gone in the range, right? And since February dollar rallied, and now with all this good news, it's kind of selling off again, I guess.
Yeah, and we are closer to the bottom. So we had that, you might call it a flight to quality trade,
Yes.
because of the war, but we didn't really make an awful lot of progress. And I noticed that my Brazilian and Mexican equities,
So
which
this
I
is so,
I
so
really
just
like those
so here the
positions.
yellow line would reflect when the war kind of started, right? This is the
Hmm.
Friday. So
Yeah.
it rallied all the way back up and now it's selling off again. So in what way, so when you say payoff, what do you mean?
Well, the dollar has through this. Well, like I look at cable, for example. Um, of course, I look at cable. I've got lots of ties to the UK. And cable really has traded better all the way through this, right?
Well, I guess it's an inverse, right? Like how would one do that?
Exactly. Exactly. We're trading up towards the short-term highs on cable. So actually, the curious thing, the US is winning. If we assume the US is winning, then why is the dollar index selling off? And then you could argue, oh, it's because global trade is a winner, really. You know, peace is a winner, global
Yes.
trade is a winner. Somewhere. Um, I've come across the argument. My ex-colleague Julian, for example, Julian Brigden, he's strongly arguing, passionately arguing, perhaps is the phrase, that what we're seeing is a turning point in the geopolitical support for the dollar. Now, I think, these things are very slow moving variables. It doesn't make sense to think of one crisis moment. Yeah, of
Well,
course.
so I've heard that argument being stated several times,
Hmm.
but like let's imagine from a practical perspective. So you're some dude who trades commodities where dollar has to
Mhm.
be settled. So you get this dollar because obviously you are living in the jungle and you're selling bananas, for instance, right? So you are getting this dollar. Now you have a choice. Will I send it to China or will I send it to America? Because I'm not like, there's the bond or like the debt markets where I can invest this to get a return aren't that big. Or I could send it to Europe. Well, I can tell you where I'm going to send it. It's not going to go. Well, I'm not saying anything about Chinese people. I'm saying about China as a governmental system isn't exactly transparent and they can take decisions which can be unilateral and detrimental to me as an investor, right?
So but
So I
you
would
go.
invest it into US bonds. So I can kind of believe that we maybe have a degradation of the faith in the dollar, but there's no other place to stick it. It's like, that joke, doctor, doctor, my brother thinks he's a chicken. And why don't you send him to the funny farm? Well, because I need the eggs.
Right.
And that's where we are at right now with the dollar. So I can see both sides of the story, but I just don't see it going away anytime soon.
So I agree with you there. There's an erosion of the volume of dollar seigniorage, but it's an erosion. There's no real alternative to the dollar. Um, China needs a dollar just as much as the US. They just would like to diversify a little bit so they can't be sanctioned out of existence. Um, and I see all that, but I also note that the to the extent this war was fought, it probably cost about $300 billion. All wars cost about $300 billion, no matter how short they are these days. Price of war, hey, terrible. Um, and so at the margin, the whole thing has just made the deficit a little bit worse. And as the
Yes.
deficit gets a little bit worse, well, you might, those are new dollars coming into existence. Do you want? And at the margin, you might say, I'll take them, but I'd like them a little cheaper. So that's one side of this that makes me think actually. And then the other thing is you can see this the impulse from this war is going to be a short-term inflationary impulse. People mean all sorts of different things. The word inflation is a little bit like using snow in Alaska. There should be a lot of words because there's a lot of different types of snow. And so it is with inflation. There's a lot of different types of inflation. What we're going to have is a one-off surge in costs. Some of that one-off surge will dissipate and some of it won't. But I damn well promise you, retail prices ain't coming down, right? They
Well, no,
don't.
because that would be deflation, right? It's like telling people my groceries are gonna get cheaper. You know that archaic word that nobody's been using for hundreds of years,
Yes,
groceries, the best
yes,
groceries in the world.
that's right. So, anyways, you can see, I'd say that all of that supports the idea that the reason equities are rallying is because equities are the least value destroying asset to hold. That we're in an inflationary environment where fiscal is expansive, there's more and more money out there. We don't really have a choice. In fact, if you've got like a 5% or 6% print in CPI, equities need to do 5 or 6% to stay to have to stay stationary in real value terms. So something like that may be part of the explanation for the new all-time highs. And then I've got a couple of tactical ideas. One of them might be that say SpaceX, there are a couple of big IPOs coming where those IPOs, is there any cash that's really changing hands? I don't know, but it kind of depends how you calculate indices and what you include in indices. So I can see how for the current basket on the index, there's an arb if you think $1.75 trillion of SpaceX money is going to show up and bid up your equities. You front run into that. So that, to some degree that you
When's
might
that
make that
IPO
argument.
scheduled for this year? Do you know?
There's talk of June to July. I
Okay.
don't know. Goldman Sachs already knows, but I do not know. But I do think there's a series of tactical arguments, and most of these tactical arguments, I'd say, once there's a room of fact case for all of them. As they come, as we talk about them, they'll make the market go up. As they arrive, the market may well reverse. So I look at all that, and it makes me think, you know what? No point selling anything, no point fighting this ground. But I don't really feel obliged to buy much back. And I do like energy assets, but I think I like refining assets more than I like crude. Anyway, so that's roughly where the
Which
Iran
is interesting.
situation
Like if
is.
I pull up a chart of Exxon really did rally post February, but it's given back a lot of its gains, right? Interestingly enough, in the last kind of in tandem with what we saw in dollar and similar to what we see in crude at the moment, right?
Yeah, I mean the equity guys proxy for commodity trades, but really the environment, I would think the environment was going to remain positive for refiners for a while because we blew up a certain amount of refining capacity in Iran and in the Gulf. And I would think also that crack spreads are sufficiently high that the refiners will make supernormal profits for a bit. There's a logistical disruption, which means that refiners in the right part of the world are going to make out like bandits if you can get the shipping.
So I guess there's two things that come to mind to what you said. Number one, there seems to be therefore a disconnect in terms of what we see going forward and what the markets are saying, right? There's a tension kind of reflected in the fact that you're not going to exactly pile up to the eyeballs. At the same time, we see a disconnect in refiners and what's going on, yet the profitability and the scarcity of it should push their price up. So there seems to be a disconnect in the market given the fundamental underlying story. Do you see that disconnect? Is it something that you're waiting to correct, something you can pre-position yourself for, or we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out?
So, when you get something wrong, the right thing to do is to stop digging, right? And to rethink it a little bit. So I'm not in any rush to take on big bets. God, now I know what to do.
Yes.
Particularly when you break to new all-time highs. I'd have a suspicion that if I'm right about the problem, the driver being fiscal, primarily fiscal, then we might run for a bit. And there's fuel because all the CTAs would have entered shorts and now they have to reverse. They're probably
Yes.
all, steadily pulling out of those shorts. Um, there's confirmation in the sense that bond markets have been a bit trashy. They haven't traded particularly well. Um, and the Dixie is not great either.
You know what's really interesting is agriculturals.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Because regardless of what, they've been in an uptrend massively for the last 6 years. And I think for them, this was just a kind of a blip. And it's going to continue pushing upwards. And that always reminds me of Jim Rogers, who always said,
Mm,
doing your MBA, what you need to do now
is
is
become a
buy yourself a
farmer.
farmer. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, he's been harping on about that for the last, he's been harping on about two things. The end of the world, like Ray Dalio, like this is for the last 50 years, Ray's kind of favorite topic is the end of the world. And then Rogers' kind of theme for the last 20 years has been farming. So what is your opinion on that, on the farming aspect of things?
I don't care. I don't want to become a farmer. Every time I've been near a farm, it smells terrible. Why do you have to be surrounded by cow poop to farm? And what makes anyone think that's how I want to spend my life?
No, I'll
So,
tell you what's interesting about farming is that if you look at the labor distribution in the States, like 120 years, that kind of makes sense.
yeah,
Like it was 20-30% was in farming. Nowadays it's 2 or 3%.
yeah.
So why is there still this massive political will to focus so much on farming, to subsidize farming? I mean, at 2 or 3% of the labor, who cares, right?
Because farmers are rich. Not all of them. There are lots of poor farmers,
Well,
but
the majority on Twitter at the moment complaining about lack of migratory help certainly would indicate that the majority of them are poor.
that's right. That's right. Who complains about that? And then I believe one of the largest landowners in America is Bill Gates.
Can you imagine Gates tilling the land?
Yes, that's right. The horny-handed son of toil. He's out there. Look at these hands. They have coded for years. Now they pull the plow. Wonderful. So, yeah, uh, I'm sure it's right that we have a problem producing enough food. I always assume that this is going to be bad for Africa because anything bad that happens is bad for Africa. Um, but yeah, fertilizers. We're short of fertilizers, and it's there's also an El Nino, and there's signs that the El Nino is going to be a big one, judging by the speed and rate of change of
Okay.
the Pacific water temperatures. So,
So then
which will
out of all
matter.
assets, we've covered equities, bonds. And to be honest, I don't see bonds going anywhere, right? Like if you pull up a long-term bond, at least of US,
You don't
uh,
see there was. I thought there was a temporary breakout to the downside actually, and
precisely, right? I
yeah.
mean, this thing hasn't exactly gone much anywhere, and there's not much duration risk you're harvesting, right? Like that was an interesting story from the 50s to maybe
Mm.
the early 2000s, 2010s, and a lot of CTAs just captured on that from 1980 onwards. But should we have long-term bonds in our portfolio, or should we just say screw it if I want exposure
Should
to
we own
fixed
bonds?
income?
No, they look terrible, don't they? So that's almost definitely proof that you should own some bonds. Um, the observation I'd make is that globally, fixed capital is being destroyed. Our access to the products of that capital is being restricted. We want to reshore politically. So most of the fixed capital investment of the last 20 years, or a big slug of it, happened in China. If we reshore, we're duplicating that capacity. So we're going to have inflation while they have deflation. But I think that is a political, there's a sense in which nobody wants to cede primacy or certainly the strategic high grounds of industry, the future 30 years of industry to the Chinese. So now we have to reshore, and that has certain consequences, which is an industrial boom and a deterioration in consumer living standards in the West. So I'd say that's a continuation of the trends we have been seeing and a confirmation of those trends. And if this is right, you could get people complaining bitterly for the foreseeable future about their standard of living falling while the stock market keeps going up. Now, in practice, you know how you get a bid for bonds even when there's scarce capital in the world? When stocks go down. That's how the bond market will catch a bid. But for the time being, you're watching the US Treasury do all sorts of gyrations to hold yields down. We are restricting the amount of duration issued. We've increased the amount of issuance at the front end. It's not one administration. This has been multiple administrations that have done this. Janet Yellen did it as well. Increase the amount of T-bills issued. There ain't that much capital in the world. And the reflow of that capital into US bond markets is now being restricted. American investors don't buy bonds, they buy equities because bonds don't pay. So the repricing on bonds is tricky. And yeah, I eventually it'll correct itself, but it corrects itself when equities go into a bear market. Where with equities where they are now, there ain't no reason to buy the long end. And so that has certain implications for interest rate sensitive components of the economy. Anyway, I don't know. Was that that's the kind of thing that gets me excited, but I notice all the color draining out of my wife's
No, I'm
face.
trying to think because it's interesting, right? Like one of the favorite investment vehicles is the 60/40 portfolio, right? And so then the question is, what kind of duration exposure do you want on your 40% side, right? Like where are people targeting? Like if we've agreed that long duration bonds are kind of garbage, then we're kind of going back to 7 years ago where I should just really buy 2 year, 5 year maturity bonds if I want to have that kind of fixed income exposure, right?
I could have sworn the portfolios that Americans have now 80/20s, that nobody has 60/40 anymore.
Well, talking about portfolio composition, like was it 1 or 2 days ago that phenomenal news from the SEC? So whoopie doopie doo, pattern day trading, your account limits have now gone down from $25,000 of balance to be able to intraday trade. down to $2,000. And I thought that was just phenomenal news, right? It brings back the news stories from 1999 where this poor guy who lost his money and probably his mortgage and everything house like went off and blew up a whole bunch of people with his shotgun in Atlanta, right? So it's interesting how talking about equity markets, the good time is coming back. Now you're going to have even more uninformed markets, margin consumption being even bigger, like leverage utilization. So it wouldn't be surprising if for the next couple of months you're going to see this flood of money from people who can barely afford it pushing equity markets up, right?
This is a really interesting observation you make, and you'll forgive me because I'm a very cynical man. And no matter how cynical I am, I always feel I could do with being a little more cynical. Um,
You're British as well, or with British roots, so
that's
that wouldn't
right.
surprise me, right?
A natural predisposition, absolutely. So, and you're right. It feels like the authorities decided we had a shortage of suckers and we needed to find some more. So we're gonna widen the net for suckers. Because there's no point just sticking to the suckers with enough money to pay their bills. We're going to go for the ones that don't. Um, what can I say? Somebody won. The products of successful lobbying is substantial.
But I think what that is, because we started out this conversation with value, right? And so value ultimately is you have some model in your head of where price or this thing should be and it isn't, right? And so how do you form value in your head? Well, you have uninformed and informed traders, right? And hopefully this discussion here is by two informed traders who have some perspective in terms of where value should be, right? But the great thing about having uninformed flow is that you can capitalize upon that, right? In terms of if the market is a competitive ecology, everybody trying to go for the right price, if the majority of people have no clue where price should be, you can pick them off, right? And so to a certain extent, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's wonderful. Well, in quotes, to see this kind of money flowing in because dislocations in market valuations are just going to be so much bigger, right? And in terms of what you spoke at the beginning, in terms of having transition from macro to micro view where I'm sitting, right? That's actually really phenomenal to see that this ecology in terms of uninformed participants is growing because it just leads to more opportunities.
So
That's very
we're
predatory, right? Like, I mean,
Oh, yeah. Obviously, I know there are some people out there that when they read about Epstein's Island, they ask, did these 14-year-olds, were they aware of where they were going? Or did they want to go there? And so it
it's
is
not
with
Epstein Island, it's now SEC Island, right?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's the
Uh,
SEC Express.
uh, I think some civil servants deserve a vacation too. I'm sure that's true. So this is what I propose. So first of all, I'm going to comment on this notion of value, right? Um, so if I knew what value was, I would do better in markets. I don't know, I know ex ante that I don't know what value is. Ex post, usually there's some superior estimate, but ex ante, I don't know. So I think to some degree, talking about value assumes away the problem. That said, I do think the Trump administration has been an excellent example of the difference between high information traders and low information traders. That this administration, there seem to be people who have an uncanny ability to trade just ahead of a statement by
I
the
don't
White
think you need
House.
to say alleged or seem in here because I think if we wind the clock back, talking about time to April 2025, Trump's pre-market tweet, I think, gave it all away. I literally, when I saw that tweet when Trump came out on Truth Social, you should buy equity markets. I went over to my wife and said,
You should buy equity
"Hey, the
markets.
nutter." He's like, "What the fuck?" Like, this shit is going off the cliff. My wife, maybe he knows something. I said, "No, he doesn't know shit." Well, he
Well,
did know something, right?
yeah, maybe your wife knows something. So, and that's the thing. And I understand a lot of people follow that account now. So, and the second thing I was going to propose is we're moving into issues which I think are directly in Corvin's sphere. So, no pun intended. Sort of sphere of knowledge. So I propose ending this video and starting part two on things Corvin has been up to recently.
Completely,
Um,
and I think just for the viewership as well. we're gonna kick that off going back to what the concept of value, because you need to have some sort of price target. But that leads us back to why do you think, or why do we think the market pays us, right? Because ultimately we're running a business here. And I think I'd like to start out with Harry's perspective on that as a macro guy. Why does he think the market pays him? Aside from all the cynical kind of perspective, but then we'll go right into what I do, right? Because ultimately it is about seeing the market more as a casino and where do you extract edge from, right?
Casino zero sum game, uh, something along those lines, or a
Well, it's a
casino.
zero-sum game in terms of wealth transfer, but there's always somebody who constantly wins, right? And that's the interesting thing. Why does that person constantly win?
Ah, you're giving the game away. You're giving the game away. But let's look at that. Okay. End of part one. Moving on to part two.